Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joe Simperman. Can we just first give a huge round of applause to Cleveland Neighborhood Progress staff for putting this awesome thing on together? Sincerely. Joel, Colleen, Nina, the whole crew, you guys are awesome. Jeff, thank you all so much. And can we just say, like, Union Miles, I want to move here. This is awesome. So a bit of housekeeping. I'm told that Trunk or Treat was so successful that the kids are still talking about the Trunk or Treat in Union Miles. So let's give it up for a great Halloween for everybody, and we're so happy and proud of our organization here. Okay, my job is to talk less, smile more, so we are going to introduce our phenomenal panelists right now. And I will just say to you that it is a real honor to be on this stage with the four of you individuals who are just doing so much to build the city of Cleveland. And I'll say this to everybody in the room, if there's anything good that's happening in the city of Cleveland right now, it has got y'all's fingerprints all over it. So first, please let me introduce over here to the far right, the Associate Director, Joy D. Johnson from Burton Bell Carr. Joy is a proud native Clevelander, went to Cleveland Metropolitan School District schools, and she wanted me to let you all know that she is an even prouder parent right now of a student at CMSD. Joy, thank you for all your great work at Burton Bell Carr. I'd also like to introduce Jamar Doyle, who is the Executive Director of Collinwood Nottingham Villages Development Corporation. JD, as we all know, is a Cleveland guy, but he went to school in a little town called Pittsburgh to the east, came back home. He's also a CMSD grad, and I'm told that he and Joy were in middle school together. And all I want to say to that teacher is thank you for this greatness, for both of you. Over here in the center of our panel is Mr. Robert Jaquay. We all know from the Gun Foundation. What a lot of people don't know about Bob is that he got his start as a community organizer in the Collinwood and Euclid communities, doing a lot of great work in church basements and working with people from a real grassroots perspective. He's also a veteran of City Hall. So I know nobody ever has any trouble with City Hall. So if you ever want to have someone to commiserate with, you can talk to Bob, who's one of us. We're so grateful for you being here, Bob. Thank you. And the final introduction before we get going is India Pierce-Lee from the Cleveland Foundation. Many of you know India. What a lot of people don't know about India is that she was at one time in her life an air traffic controller, for real, which would explain a lot of how she's able to manage so many things all at once in her work at the Cleveland Foundation. And she's somebody who I got to know when I was a city council person when we were working in our neighborhoods, and she was somebody who never, ever said no. So I want to just welcome our panel here. Let's give them a big round of applause. So I'm going to start out with India. India, and then I'll turn to Bob. With your experience and understanding of the CDC industry and the community that's in the room, you both have such history, and you're known to all of us. But over the past 40 years, as we look at 2018, what is it about that the CDCs are doing in Cleveland right now that excites you? And then what is it that we should be mindful of in terms of any anxieties you may have? India?
Well, for me, I think a lot of what we heard today is that we are looking at community development now from a more holistic lens, looking at the racial equity and inclusion. For years, we've been working on all kinds of projects and initiatives to try and change our neighborhoods. And we keep asking, why haven't we taken it to scale, and why haven't we made a difference in people's lives? And 30 years later now, we're figuring out why. And so I'm excited about the conversation, the opportunity. It's just the beginning, but I think it's, within each of us and each institution we work with to begin changing the dynamics about how we look at what we do in the community, who we serve in the community, and our purpose for being here.
Thank you. Bob, would you like to talk about that a little bit, please?
So I'll take a different tack. I agree with everything that Indy has said, and I'll add to the work that we're doing on racial inclusion that the dynamic of the city of Cleveland is changing in that the community development work of 30 years ago was working with communities that chose not to go to the suburbs. And today, I see that a lot of children that grew up in the suburbs, as they become young adults, want to live back in the core. And that's a fundamental change from the work of 30 years ago. And it gives me a great deal of hope, combined with the fact that we're working really intentionally and systematically across the board to have real conversations about race and privilege and what cumulative effects have over the long haul that affects our work so deeply.
Thank you. Jamar and Joy, I want to ask you both a question as individuals helping lead respective CDCs. You do 100 different things every day. You probably forget more than half of them because you're always on to the next project. But in your roles of leadership and the fact that you are the next generation of the individuals who are leading our city, not will lead, what would you say are the top 3 most important things that you do every day as a leader, things that maybe you don't do as well as you want to but are mindful of? Jamar?
For me, and that's a great question, I think it's grooming the next generation because even though I'm sitting here now sort of representing the future, as we were just discussing a moment ago, I won't be the future for very long. I'm going to be sitting where you all are, and that's just, and I mean, that quite didn't come out right.
That just happened. So, ladies and gentlemen,
Wait.
Jamar Doyle,
Listen,
your car is waiting for you in front.
if I could achieve half of what these two have achieved, I would be honored and more than honored to sit where they're sitting. So, but seriously, time moves on, right? And if we're not planning for who are going to lead our communities in the future, then we are failing our communities. And I think that as we talk about, and Bob makes some great points that, now there is a unique moment in the city where people are energized and are moving back in. How do we also connect that with the residents that are already living in our communities? How do we get our young people just as excited about our neighborhoods as those maybe moving from the suburbs have rediscovered it? We need our own neighbors to rediscover the community and make sure that assets that we're bringing in also speak to that generation, because I like to say that we need to attract and retain, but we also have to grow and maintain. We need to grow from within as well. So I think it's not an either-or proposition, it's both, and that's why it's so important to make sure that we're training those leaders for the future generation.
And that's what we call a comeback. Joy?
He's been here for years, don't call it a comeback. I don't know if I can think of 3. I definitely would like to echo everything that Jamar said. So the first thing that comes to mind to me is that community development is an approach to work, and I've learned at the College of BBC that not everybody understands that approach. We're used to working with less and trying to make the most out of less, so we use partnerships all the time. And partnerships and collaboration is a foreign concept to some people. So I would say 1 is always trying to figure out how we can work together with others to accomplish our goals. 2, for sure, pouring into community members and building their capacity, pouring into staff members, building their capacity, not only in our organization, but in other organizations. And that's 2, so, and listening to the residents always. They'll get you together.
So this question's for Joy and for India. There's so much conversation going on now, thank God, on racial equity and inclusion, and really what it means to be a city for everybody, by everybody. But one of the conversations that I've been trying to have with my 11-year-old daughter is the role that women play in saving our city. And I'd like just to hear from the 2 of you, 2 incredibly amazing women who are doing it every day, but you've got a lot of other things that you have to keep in mind. And if you could just talk about it from your perspective, I would guess from maybe a gender equality lens. Joy?
I guess I do have the mic, I have to speak. So sometimes, and I love everybody that I work with, I have to remind them that I'm a mom of a school-age person. I think we have one other person on our staff who's the mom of a school-ager, but he doesn't stay with her all the time. So there's just a different set of requirements for me. And sometimes, as much as we want to be seen as equals, that we all can do the same thing, is the part that makes it challenging is that people don't see that you're the head of the household. When I'm checking that on my income tax, head of household, I have earned that for the year, making the decisions on home repairs, making the decisions on where my daughter goes to school, and then constantly just dealing with sending your child to public schools. So there's all of these other things that I'm dealing with that never really get brought into the discussion, and I'm still expected to perform at the level that everybody else is, which I should be, but.
So what do you want to say to the male CDC directors out there? Because we're keeping it real on Union Miles.
My job is very flexible in understanding. My daughter Kendall has been a part of all sorts of activities. They know her, so I appreciate them. So be like Tim Tramble and allow your staff to bring their children into work. That's what I was saying.
Thank you, Joy. With her doctorate from the BBC University. India?
So, you know, when I think about my past, I've been in all of my jobs, which were mostly male-dominated. Not female, black, or white, having to come up at a time when women were supposed to, like, stay in your place, be a homemaker, being told you should be at home barefoot and pregnant. So I have come up through the ranks having to deal with males, and it never occurred to me in the community development realm till some other men pointed out, you're one of the few females, at the time directors we didn't have a lot, or in the positions I've held, but I've had to have battles, even with some of the people in this room. Because from a racial standpoint, not understanding as someone that grew up in the neighborhood in Glenville, still living in the neighborhood, the kind of things I see on the ground, trying to make a change in our community, not from people sitting in the room making decisions about the neighborhood, but understanding the things that my family, our neighbors, our friends have to deal with on a day-to-day. And believe it or not, when I started in this, I used to be an introvert and quiet. And when I started working in the community and learning to have to advocate for others, this other voice came out. And some of you have been the wrath of it. But, you know, but one thing I tell, like, some of our emerging leaders and young professionals, don't get in this for a job. Because we're dealing with individuals. We're dealing with people's lives. And you have to look at this, you know, it's a 24/7 proposition. If you're not passionate about it, don't do it. And even within the foundation, I have to use my voice and remind people that when we get grants, it's not words on paper. It's how we're impacting people's lives. And I think women are naturally caregivers and, you know, always trying to be the one. And I try to emulate that with other young professionals, younger women, men. You know, I try to give back like people who gave back to me.
Thank you. Great answers. So this next question is going to be for this end of the panel for Bob, Jaquay, and India. Bob and India, you've both had such incredible careers, and you're not even at the halfway point yet. The one thing that, do you see that, Jamar? You see that, Jamar? That's a little city council BS for you right there. Old school. But in all sincerity, you know, there's a lot of things that I think people in the room are surprised to know. Some of the things are the fact that, you know, Bob and India were both part of administrations who led our city, whether it was with Mayor Voinovich or Mayor White. A lot of the tools that we use today are a result of the great work that was laid before us. And Bob and India, from your perspectives, what is something that you wish we still did? Either when you were working in the law department or community development, when you were going out for Mayor Voinovich and talking to the community, or Mayor White India was asking you to do something, because I think in Cleveland we tend to look so forward, we sometimes forget our perspective. Bob?
So by the time I retire in 2046, I'm hopeful that we can reinstitute. This is an interesting question. In some ways, I think it's really important for us to remember the roots of how our work came about. But at the same time, it's not a backward-looking thing. It's just to remember how we got to the point where we are and what we're doing to look to the future. And in some ways, the past retrospective looks and the celebration, while they're important, somehow always have to have that nexus with the future view. And I see that in this panel. I'm a little nervous about us getting too sentimental, romanticized, rose-colored glasses about the past. Because we were trying to solve social ills, we were trying to infuse life into markets that, things were really bad then in many, many ways. Anyhow, let's look to the future and not look to the past. That's the best stuff that happened in that era.
Thank
People
you.
were forward-looking.
Thank you. India?
Well, I think when I think about where we are today, how social media has changed from what we've done in the past. Because before, with community, you could reach out, you knew your neighbor, you wouldn't, kind of, when we talk about engagement, back then there was, I think, more authentic community engagement than what we have now. And so how do we fast forward with social media and some of the things we heard in the earlier panels, really get people, and I shy away from organizing more and about engagement and involvement, because unless we have an engaged, involved, and educated citizenry, to address the issues. And the thing that worries me the most that I see from back then, that we still have poverty. Our school systems are still not where they should be. Our neighborhoods, we still have redlining in the community at a time when we shouldn't have it, with our banks and financial institutions, and how neighborhoods are still being looked at to keep people apart. And that disturbs me more than anything.
Jamar, this question's for you, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to weigh in too. There was a great speaker on the radio yesterday, the famous actor Michael Caine, who came from a really poor background and lived through World War II. And one of the things that he talked about was use the difficulty. He kept talking about using the difficulty in his life. And we're at a point right now in our country where our national government doesn't necessarily understand what philanthropy is doing, or certainly what the CDC world is doing. How do you jibe that? How do you make those two things seem together when there's such a feeling in this country of separateness, and yet every single day the four of you are the Elmer's glue that keeps it together?
I'll tell you, at times it's difficult when you watch the news. And I was sharing with some folks in the room that prior to being here in this room right now, I was in Pittsburgh with family members for a happy celebration, but the city itself is mourning, and we know that. And actually, the organization that my brother is executive director of in Pittsburgh, the office building is 2 doors down from the Tree of Life. So he knew quite a few people that were impacted and families. And so it's difficult, I think, because we can, without getting too far into it, we know that the challenge we have now is that our political discourse no longer is civil. And that leads to an ability where people are no longer friends and can't speak to relatives because of politics. And it's degraded to the point that, how do we, sometimes we're talking about building communities and having hope when things look so hopeless. But I think that's when hope comes out at the strongest. That's when we have to hold on to hope. That's when we have to start working even harder. I love the saying that faith without works is dead. We have to have faith that the future will be better, but we've got to put our hands to work. We've got to continue to do the work and be faithful to the work, and be hopeful that the work that we're doing are planting seeds now that will undo all of this madness that we're seeing. Because if we start to lose hope, and if those in this room who are doing good work lose hope, then where do we leave the future? So I think it's a fascinating question. It's difficult right now because you see in the news and you see how people are just treating each other. But I think it starts with each of us loving someone else, reaching out across the aisles. That's why even as we talk about being more, talking about racial equity and inclusion and making sure that our neighborhoods are more inclusive, it's serious. It's serious work, because as we start to build bonds again with people that don't look like us, think like us, pray like us, then we start to break down these bonds that are separating us, and we'll become better people. And as we become better people, our communities become better places. Our state becomes a better state, and our nation becomes a better nation. Our world becomes a better world. But it starts with us. And I think I just can't lose hope. So I get up every day and I'm hopeful. I look at the news and I cry. And then I go into work, and I'm hopeful, and I go right back to work. And I think we just have to have that attitude.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamar. Joy,
Jamar was preaching right there.
right? Come on.
So for me, I feel like these events of the last few years show people who aren't engaged and who are apathetic that this is all the more reason to be engaged. And I think that social media is a good tool to spark conversations that you wouldn't be able to have otherwise. Now, we can sit around and talk about these things amongst each other all day in the break room, at work, that sort of thing, but I'm able to engage with people that I went to college with that are now in California and New Mexico, and we may not have a lot in common other than the fact that we went to a small liberal arts school in Western PA. So that's what I like about social media. And I even had someone unfriend me or block me this weekend because he was unfriending anyone who posted about the incidents all week, not just the synagogue shooting, but there was a shooting in Kroger's that I didn't even know about when I posted, and the mail bombs, saying, how can you politicize these things? And my question to him was, how can you not? And so the bad part about social media is that you can filter and say, oh, if Joy is posting things that I don't agree with, I'm going to block her. And it does kind of allow you to close your eyes. But if the approach to this is you're saying something I don't want to say, so I'm just going to close my eyes and close my ears and say, la, 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 you're not talking, I don't know how much we'll accomplish. So I think a tool in community organizing, sometimes you can get people to come together when there's been a shooting. You can get people to come together when there's been a rash of break-ins. Sometimes it takes something bad to bring people together. And so that's been the approach that I've tried to take. If you don't think people should have access to guns, guess what? We get to pick the people who write the laws for guns. Come and vote, and it doesn't cost you anything. And guess what? A burn-belt car will give you a ride to the polls. So it just kind of, you can turn it, I hate to say spin it, but you can turn it in a way to empower the work.
Thank you, Joy. Bob, in India, specifically, the Gun Foundation, the Cleveland Foundation, individually, collectively, we're at the forefront of the battle against the ignorance and hatred toward people with AIDS. You work a lot on women's reproductive causes and issues. You're constantly battling the isms that Mayor Jackson talks about, but your foundations and you're not political at a time of our president. Bob, how do you square that when you go to work every day to help this city?
So I think that our work is about trying to create space for voices that are marginalized to be heard. Though we have tax restrictions that prohibit us from lobbying or from participating in partisan activities, nonetheless, we can use the law to empower nonprofits and the communities they serve to have voice and no longer to be marginalized. And so it's a general approach to our work that I think is very timely in this environment. I'm still on the last question, folks. I have to say this. I don't know about you, but in this toxic climate, I find great comfort in the very work that we do. Community development is a constant about bringing people together. It's a constant about taking action with what we have available immediately to us to make the world better, even if it's in a modest form or it isn't of world-changing size at the moment. It's a positive contribution when there's so much negative around us. My heroes in my business, when I was coming up as a raw rookie, were folks like Steve Minter, who, not just by what he said, but by how he acted, broke all kinds of barriers within Cleveland. Norm Krumholtz, who in the work that he espoused, I agree, all of these folks deserve applause, are people that, well, Harry Fagan, I could go on with all kinds of heroes in my life, people that are in the room today that are my cohorts, like India Pierce Lee and Linda Warren and Bobby Richtel, who constantly kept bringing people together and trying to fight for lasting social change. That's what we're about. And so in this toxic environment, just by going to work and doing the best we can in the roles that we have in our communities, we're changing the world for a much better, and we're responding in a very productive way to this terrible environment.
Thank you.
And I think through the grant making we do, through the organizations that are here, giving you the voice to be the voice on the ground is how we do that, regardless of what your how you think politically. But I think the opportunity, and I have to make this plug, is everybody here has a voice. Everybody has to vote and get everybody out, because that's how we make change. We can't do it through our organization, and regardless of your political inclination, everybody needs to use their voice. And I think we can support that through neighborhood progress, through the CDCs, through the community engagement, the work that we do. And again, it's, the one thing that does give me hope, that through all of this toxic environment, we have new people stepping up. We see women coming into the political system that probably would not have done it because of it. We see young people, LGBTQ, people that are now taking back their voice to come into the system, and that will move some of the people out of the system and create new leadership that we need.
Thank you, Indy. Thank you. So I'm going to ask a quick few other questions, and then we would probably have a few minutes to open it up to Q&A, not a lot because we're keeping a close time. But if you could, though, India, Bob, Jamar, Joy, you're all so able to communicate these really interesting concepts to us that we live every day. But I'm going to start with you, Jamar. Would you be willing to share with us one story of why you got into this and what keeps you in here?
All right. Why I got into community development?
And what keeps you going to work every day?
All right. I guess the honest answer is two things: a video game and a bad internship. So really quick, I don't know if anyone are kids of the '90s and played SimCity. Anyone know Sim? That was one of my favorite games, and so I always remember SimCity. But how it relates to it, I actually wanted to be an architect. And so I just would draw buildings, and I wanted to be an architect, and I had a little junior architecture kit, and it was exciting. But I ran into college math at the University of Pittsburgh, and that ended. But I had a wonderful, I took a class, Urban Studies 101, and I had a wonderful professor there, Dr. Carolyn White, and actually Nora was in that same class. And it changed my life, because I said, well, listen, I realize I don't have the skill to design the building, but I can help design the community that the building sits in. And as I went through that class, it was eye-opening, and it was amazing. And so I said, this is a career path that I want to take. And so what's kept me in it is the ability to impact positively where I'm from. I grew up in Glenville. I'm now in Collinwood. So I'm one neighborhood over. But ups to both Glenville and Collinwood, holla. But I'm just excited because I grew up in those communities, and now I have a chance to see my home improved. And that, to me, just keeps me going. There's, as India said, sometimes this can be a difficult job and career, and no one goes into it for fame, but I am excited because, I can go back and even when I see schoolmates, and they're sort of like, well, what are you doing? And I tell them what I do, and they're like, that's so interesting. And, how can I do this? Or I want to get a house, or and I'm able to help people that I know. Like, it keeps me going. It keeps me going.
Thank you. Joy?
So I have a similar story to Jamar, where I went to school for communications, and I had an internship at a TV station in Erie, and we would sit and listen to the police scanner, and then we would get in the car and go to the scene of crimes. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, where I'm from, we run from the gunshots. We don't go to the gunshots. So I realized I like writing. I like coming back and writing the stories and hearing her read my words on the news, but I did not like being the person going out at the worst time in somebody's life and sticking a microphone in people's faces. And the only reason why I wanted to be on the news was when I was a kid, I thought everybody had to be famous, and I only wanted to be a little bit famous, so I said I'd be on local news. So like Jamar, I also took an urban studies class in college, and a lot of the case studies and things that we read about were in Cleveland, like Cleveland school busing and deed restrictions and the city of Euclid versus such and such. And I'm like, wow. And, there it is. I didn't remember the case, but there it was. So it was really surprising to me to see that people were studying me and people were studying where I lived and that there were careers around this. So I knew I didn't want to be on the news. I knew I wanted to work for a nonprofit, but I didn't really know how that was going to work out. I graduated from college. My dad bugged me every day. You got a job yet? Have you been on interviews yet? And so they tease me that I have a really large family, and a lot of my family is from Central, Kinsman, Fairfax, so the neighborhoods that we're serving. So Burton Bill Carr was having a grand opening for several new homes that they had built on East 73rd Street in Central, which is where my grandmother lived. And my dad was like, come over here and bring your resume. The mayor's gonna be here, the councilman's gonna be here, you're gonna get a job. And I'm like, okay, Daddy, whatever. And somehow they changed the time, or he told me the wrong time, and I had to stay home because the gas company was coming, and you know they say they'll be there anytime between 8 a.m. and forever. And my mom was like, I'm not taking off of work. You're over 18. You're not doing anything. You stay here. So I missed the grand opening, but my dad went and met all of these people, told him he had a daughter that just graduated from college, and got several people's business cards, including Tim Tramble. And at the time, he had a cast on his arm. I'm sorry, this story is so long.
It's a good one.
Because he fell off a ladder, like painting my grandmother's house or something, painting somebody's house. So he's like, in your cover letter, make sure you say the guy with the cast on his arm. Like, he was so serious. And he's like, you better come over here and get these business cards. And he was on me. So really, I got this job just trying to shut my dad up. And it was, I want to say that was May, and then in July, Burton Bill Carr had an opening, and I interviewed, and I started in August. I've been there ever since.
Awesome. From Sim City to Broken Arms. Mr. Jaquay.
So in the last session, one of the speakers talked about how you have to go in a room and open yourself up. So in that spirit. So the roots of my community development career come from the fact that I've lived the mantra, it takes a village. My mother died when I was 7, and my single father dad depended on extended family and a lot of neighbors. My sister and I always had other eyes looking out for us in our neighborhood. And it just naturally was something that gravitated in me, this great, overwhelming gratitude and wanting to pay forward. When I was a Boy Scout, there was a woman in the neighborhood whose kids were also in my Cub Scout pack, and she stepped up to be my den mother. There were teachers that made sure there were a few extra sandwiches around just to make sure if we weren't quite covered, we'd eat. So when I was a Boy Scout, the only merit badge that I seemed to have the gumption to finish was citizenship in the community. When I went off and all the little Catholic kids went off to Borromeo to figure out if they had a vocation, I knew I had a vocation, but because I liked girls too much, it wasn't the priesthood. But the sense of community that I got from that same spiritual well is the stuff that still drives the passion that I have for this work today. My guess is that my story, with a lot of variations in the detail, probably has the well of passion that we all share in some real fundamental way.
Thank you.
So, as mentioned, I was an air traffic controller. I was one of those people that left Cleveland. I was never coming back. Living in Michigan after the strike, I came back to Cleveland, went into banking, and then went back out to County Airport under private air traffic. And I didn't know at the time, but Councilman Tyrone Bolden asked me to come to Mount Pleasant to build new housing. And I'm like, new housing in the city? I don't know anything. And he said, you'll learn. And I literally quit my job, showed up in Mount Pleasant, at the time Mount Pleasant Alive. It wasn't Mount Pleasant now. And nobody knew I was coming. And jumped into this and basically had a lot of people teach me, and a lot of people like Rob Curry and Mark and Art Stofus. I could just go down the line, how to do development, and Randy Graddick. It's a whole lot of people, and I literally learned from the ground up. But for me, it was getting out on the street, meeting the people and the families. And, you know, at the time, people don't remember, mortgage rates were 11 to 18%. Cleveland Action to Support Housing had a program to do 4.99% 30-year fixed mortgages, and we had a 7-year tax abatement to build new houses. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And so I basically learned from the ground up with a lot of people, again, helping me. I later found out that my sister was determined I was not going to leave Cleveland. And so every time it looked like I was going to leave, that's why they kept looping me back in.
That's wonderful. So, awesome. So final question here. We are in the great neighborhood of Union Miles. We are here in the hall of the Mystic Knights in a great part of a great city, Joy. And I'm going to ask each of you this. In 10 years, progress looks like what? Or looks like who? Or looks like when? Your choice.
No pressure at all, right? And you said in one word?
It looks like what? Progress. How does it look like? Or who does
Prosperity.
it look like? Oh, wow. Okay. Way to go, Meadville, Allegheny College. Jamar, you could take more than one word. Go ahead.
Man, that's a tough challenge, though, to follow.
Yeah.
I don't think I can do it in one, but it's I hesitate to say this, it's inclusive, because I know we use it a lot, but it's truly inclusive, so that when we talk about prosperity, everyone is benefiting from it, in all corners of the city, all walks of life.
I can't do it in one word, and I can't even do it in a paragraph, so bear with me, folks. 10 years from now, I'm hopeful that the east side of Cleveland has restored walk-to-work neighborhoods.
Woo!
We inherit a physical form that was built a century or more ago by our ancestors, so that it was possible for people to live in communities and be able to walk back and forth to work, kids to be able to negotiate their way to school and to recreation, and to find accessibility, whether it was by car or by foot or by transit, to places like hospitals for medical care and downtown for shopping and banking and all the other needs. I'm hopeful that throughout parts of the city of Cleveland, we again have that kind of vibrancy and connectedness. And I think it is very, very, very possible with the kinds of things that we're working on together.
Thank you.
So for me, in 10 years, the entire city needs to be racially diverse, economically diverse, whether it's downtown, east side, or west side. And we no longer have this east side, west side, downtown conversation. It's the city of Cleveland.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard from Joy Johnson, Jamar Doyle, Bob Jaquay, and India Pierce Lee, our lighthouses.